All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into something that's been in the news quite a bit lately, and that's India's decision to, well, they've scrapped that 20% export duty they had on onions. And we've got a government press release here kind of laying out their thinking. And I guess our mission is to figure out, why now, what went into this decision, and what does it mean going forward, I guess, for all of us, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think just to set the stage a little bit, it's helpful to remember that we're talking about a commodity here, onions, right? And for almost 5 months, starting back in December of 23, India had a straight up export ban on these things. No onions leaving the country. They wanted to make sure there was enough for everybody at home.
Makes sense, yeah.
Then in September of last year, so, not that long ago, they shifted gears a bit. They lifted the ban, but slapped on a 20% export duty. And now, boom, as of, what is it, April 1st?
April 1st.
April 1st, it's gone. Duty's gone. So, yeah, the million-dollar question is, what changed?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the government is trying to walk a tightrope here. They want to make sure farmers get a decent price for their onions, but they also don't want consumers getting slammed with crazy high prices at the market. And, it's fascinating because looking at the numbers, the wholesale prices, what they call mandi prices, they're actually higher now than they were at the same time last year. But get this, they've dropped a ton recently. We're talking a 39% average decline across all of India. And even at the retail level, prices have come down about 10% just in the last month.
So you've got these like dueling trends almost. And, one thing that the government's really highlighting in the press release is that there's been a big surge in how many onions are arriving at those major markets, places like Lasalgaon and Pimpalgaon.
Oh, yeah, right. Those are like the big onion hubs, right?
Exactly. And they even give us figures like snapshot March 21st. The average price in those markets was around Rs 13.30 per quintal. So like you can almost see the increased supply pushing those prices down, which is kind of wild to see play out like that.
Yeah, it is. And the main reason for all these extra onions, well, it looks like everyone's expecting a bumper crop from the rabi harvest. That's the winter-spring one. The Department of Agriculture, they're forecasting something like 227 lakh metric tons this year. I mean, to put that in perspective, that's over 18% higher than last year's harvest, which was already pretty substantial at 192 LMT. So yeah, we're talking a lot of onions here.
A lot of onions. And, it's important to understand that this rabi crop, it's not just some small thing. It's actually like the backbone of India's onion supply.
Hmm.
Makes up maybe 75% of what they produce in a whole year. And it's what keeps things stable until the next harvest rolls around. That's the Kharif crop, which comes in around October and November. So yeah, a strong rabi harvest, that's a game changer, basically.
Totally. And I think it's also worth pointing out, even with all those export restrictions we talked about, India was still exporting a pretty good amount of onions. Like in the 2023-24 fiscal year, they shipped out 17.1 cent LMT, and so far this year, up to like mid-March, they'd already exported 11.65 LMT. And here's the kicker. Even with that 20% duty in place, those monthly export numbers were actually going up.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Kind of makes you wonder how much that duty was really putting the brakes on exports, especially if there was a lot of demand out there internationally.
For sure.
But I mean, at the end of the day, the government's rationale for getting rid of the duty now, it seems pretty clear cut, right? They're saying, hey, look, we want farmers to make good money and we want people to be able to afford onions. And guess what? Prices are down right now because we're expecting this awesome rabi crop. So they're basically saying this is a win-win, and they're framing it as a positive outcome after, dealing with some tough times with low production and those sky-high global prices for a while.
Absolutely. So just to kind of recap for everyone listening, the big takeaway here is that India's decision to scrap the onion export duty is really all about this huge increase they're expecting in production from the rabi harvest.
Yeah.
And that's led to lower prices, both wholesale and retail, which is good news for everyone. And, despite having some limits on exports before, India has still been a big player in the global onion market. So yeah, the government's basically saying this move is a good thing for farmers and consumers alike.
Right, exactly. But here's a question I think is worth pondering. We all know that prices for agricultural products, they can be pretty volatile. So how do you think this big rabi crop and the removal of that export duty, how might that shake things up in the onion market down the line, both in India and around the world? What other things, besides just, how much they're growing, what other things might come into play and affect those prices in the coming months? That's something to chew on.
Yeah, some good food for thought. And hey, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.